I called it growth when I started hiding Samir in the corners of my life. 3 rooms, 2 cameras, one husband carrying the thing I used to praise him for. Of course, I said I was only protecting my image. The truth came slower and colder than shame. By the end, people looked at me like the cheap part of the room. My name is Annika Rowe. I was 39, and I worked as a lead UX researcher at Glasshouse Labs, where I studied how people ranked each other before anyone admitted ranking was happening. I called it research, of course, because research sounded cleaner than hunger with a badge. 2 glass walls, 1 demo lounge, and 1 woman checking whether she looked expensive enough to belong. That was how I saw myself then. Controlled. Sharp. The person who knew where power sat in a room before the room had finished filling. I built tests for a professional networking app that promised to help people become visible to the right circles. I knew the right circles. Or I thought I did. Samir came to the demo lounge late that Thursday carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. He was 42, my husband, and he taught furniture restoration in the evenings after working in his own shop during the day. His jacket was clean but plain. The cuff had one pale mark near the wrist, probably from sanding dust. Of course, that was the first thing I saw. Talia Price stood beside me with a plastic cup of white wine and said, very quietly, that Samir looked like he had built the furniture instead of attending the launch. I smiled before I decided whether the joke was cruel. That was one of my bad habits. My face often chose before I did. Samir handed me the box after my demo. Inside was a handmade walnut phone stand, smooth and dark, with a small groove cut for my charging cable. He said he made it for my new desk because my phone was always sliding under papers. Years before, he had built my first home office desk after my promotion. He measured the corner twice, stayed up until 2 sanding the edges, and brought me coffee on the floor while the varnish dried. That was real. I do not need to make him smaller to make the rest of this easier. Felix Arden came over while I held the phone stand. He was a brand advisor who moved through rooms like someone had already saved him a seat. He said my presentation made the whole app feel smarter than the men funding it. Samir smiled. He looked proud. Quiet proud. The kind that asked to be understood without asking. Later, near the glass doors, he asked what had changed between us. Soft curiosity. No trap. No sharp edge. I told him nothing had changed. I said I was tired. I said launches made me strange. He looked at the phone stand in my bag, not on my desk, and nodded like he had heard a different answer. That night, at home, the walnut stand stayed in the tote beside my laptop. The coffee bar near Glasshouse Labs smelled like burnt espresso and steamed oat milk, which was the official perfume of people pretending they had not slept badly. I sat with Talia at the narrow counter by the window, my laptop open, Felix's message glowing in the corner of my screen. He had invited me to a private founder dinner at the Marlo Club. Guest welcome, the message said. Optional, but welcome. I called it a work event. Of course I did. 2 words. 1 clean label. No argument unless someone looked too closely. Talia leaned over before I could close the window. She said Felix was smart to invite me without making it a couples thing. Then she said some husbands were foundation pieces, not front-facing assets. I told her not to be horrible. She said she was being practical. That was the danger with Talia. She did not sound wicked. She sounded efficient. She worked beside me in research operations and had a talent for making envy look like strategy. Her own life was careful, almost silent, and she liked mine best when I made noise. When I complained about Samir, she never asked the one question that would have stopped me. She never asked why I still wanted him to be there if I was so ashamed of him. Miriam Cho walked in while Talia was still laughing. Miriam was a senior product designer, calm in the way people become calm after choosing not to impress everyone. She heard Talia say front-facing assets. Her eyes moved to me, then to my laptop. She ordered tea and did not join us. That was the first small distance. No speech, no accusation. Just Miriam choosing the other end of the counter. At home that evening, Samir had left my dinner under a glass lid on the stove. Lentil soup, bread, and the small green olives I liked. The apartment smelled like cumin and wood oil from the cloth he used on one of his cabinet doors. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the walnut phone stand beside him, not placed like evidence, just there. He asked about the Marlo Club dinner. He said he had seen the notification when he moved my laptop from the sofa because the charger cord was bending. Specific and factual. Guest welcome, he said. Then he asked what happened to the guest. I said nothing happened to the guest. I said it was a work thing. I said those rooms were boring for him. He did not answer fast. That pause irritated me because pauses give you too much room to hear yourself. Then he said I had introduced him at the last launch as the practical one. He said people laughed. He said he had waited afterward for me to explain what I meant, but I never did. He asked whether I had meant it the way it sounded. One named incident. One real question. Samir could do that when he finally found the nerve. He would not say he was hurt first. He would bring the exact object to the table and wait for me to identify it. I heard a charge sheet. I told him he was making one light introduction into a case. I said people in tech made jokes. I said practical was a compliment. He looked at his hands. There was a thin line of walnut dust under one nail. He said practical was fine when it meant useful. He said it was less fine when it meant not worth showing. That should have slowed me down. Instead, I opened the fridge and moved jars I did not need to move. Pickles, mustard, almond butter. 3 jars, 2 doors, 1 husband waiting for a real sentence. I said I did not know how to bring him into rooms where everyone spoke in terms he disliked. I said he hated networking. I said he looked miserable every time someone mentioned investors or scale. He said he looked careful because he knew those rooms mattered to me. He said careful was not the same as ashamed. What he meant was that he had been trying to stand beside me without asking me to translate him. What I heard was that he wanted me to do extra emotional work in rooms where I already had to fight for status. My phone buzzed. Felix again. He wrote that the dinner would be sharper if I came. He added that some people made rooms move faster. I turned the phone face down too late. Samir saw the movement. He did not ask to read it. That made me angrier than a question would have. A question gives you a fight. His silence made me responsible for the shape of the thing. The next morning at work, I told Talia that Samir had made the dinner strange. Talia asked if he wanted to come and make small talk about varnish with founders. I laughed because the sentence made him ridiculous before I had to. Hannah Weiss, one of our junior researchers, was sitting near the booth with headphones around her neck. She heard enough. Her face changed in a small way. Not judgment. More like rearranging a picture on a wall. I told Hannah we were joking. She said, of course. That, of course, did not sound like mine. It had no escape in it. Later, Miriam came by my desk and asked whether Samir was going to the dinner. I said no because it was better to keep some rooms simple. Miriam looked at the walnut phone stand, still in my tote under a scarf, and said that simple was an interesting word. That comment stayed with me because it had no handle. I could not pull it apart without making myself obvious. By Friday, I had decided the guest part of the invite was only polite wording. I told Samir the Marlo Club had limited space. I did not say Felix had asked twice whether I was bringing anyone. I did not say Felix had called spouses optional energy. I did not say I liked that phrase enough to hate it. Before I left, Samir stood in the hallway near the coat hooks. He wore the navy shirt I once bought him because it made his shoulders look less like a man who worked with his hands. That was my thought. Less like. Not more handsome. Less like. He asked if I wanted him to meet me after. I said I would be late. He said he could wait. I called it kindness when it suited me and pressure when it did not. That night, I chose pressure. At the Marlo Club, the lights were low and the table numbers were etched into brass. Felix greeted me near the stairs and put one hand lightly near my elbow without touching. He said the room improved when I walked in alone. I laughed. I hated that I laughed. I loved that he said it where 2 founders could hear. A location story went up before dessert. Felix tagged me beside a dark marble bar with the club name behind us. At home, Samir saw it before I texted that I was still at work. The Marlo Club dinner the next Saturday smelled like cedar smoke, red wine, and the kind of money that never needs to raise its voice. The private room had green leather chairs and framed black and white photos of men who looked like they had signed papers other people carried. I had worn a cream dress because cream said calm if you kept it clean. I called it visibility. Of course I did. 3 glasses on the table, 2 investors smiling, 1 empty chair I had not expected to matter. Samir arrived 40 minutes after the first course. Miriam had told him spouses were welcome. She did not do it to punish me. That was almost worse. She had assumed I had made an oversight, not a choice. Samir walked in wearing the navy shirt, his coat folded over one arm. He looked toward me first, then toward the chair beside me, where Felix had placed his jacket. Felix stood and moved the jacket with a smile that did not touch his eyes. Agenda B was already there. He knew how to be close enough to benefit and far enough to deny. Talia's hand tightened around her wineglass. Orla Bennett, seated across from me, lifted her eyebrows but said nothing. Hannah was not at the dinner, but she had helped with the guest list, and later I would wonder who saw which version first. Samir sat beside me. He did not ask why I had told him space was limited. He did not look angry. He looked like a man choosing not to let the room watch him bleed. That made me crueler. The walnut phone stand was on the small display table near the entrance. I had brought it that morning because Felix had suggested the room needed a little domestic texture for the product photos. That was the phrase. Domestic texture. I had placed Samir's handmade gift beside a glass award, a stack of app mock-ups, and a bowl of black business cards. Felix noticed it during drinks and said it was charming in a pre-scale way. People laughed softly. Not at first. They waited for me. I could have corrected him. I could have said Samir made it. I could have said it was not a prop. I could have put my hand on my husband's arm and made the room safer. Instead, I smiled. I said Samir was excellent at making things that belonged in rooms before people like me improved them. That sentence landed like a fork dropped on stone. Talia laughed first, sharp and automatic, then her laugh ended too soon. Orla looked down into her glass. Miriam's mouth closed. Felix smiled, but smaller now, like he enjoyed the heat but did not want it on his own sleeve. Samir looked at the phone stand. Not at me. Not at Felix. At the object. His face did not crack. That was the part that made everyone else uncomfortable. A man shouting would have given the room a script. Samir gave them nothing but quiet. I kept going because stopping would have admitted I had heard myself. I said craftsmen thought every object was sacred. I said people in my world understood iteration. I said sometimes love needed a better user interface. Nobody laughed that time. A server entered with plates of sea bass and stopped half a step too long. The candles on the table kept burning. Someone near the door cleared his throat and then pretended he had not. Samir stood. Slowly. He walked to the display table, picked up the walnut phone stand, and held it in both hands. He did not hide it. He did not make a speech. He only removed it from the place where I had put it. Then he placed it beside his coat. That quiet action made the whole room understand what I had done before I was ready to understand it myself. I leaned toward him and said he was being sensitive. I made it soft, but soft can still cut. I said I was praising his skill. I said he knew how these rooms worked. He asked if we could speak outside for a minute. Quiet debrief. No raised voice. The quiet was the point. I heard control. I heard him trying to pull me from a room where I was finally winning. In the hallway, the carpet swallowed our footsteps. The bathroom doors were polished brass and our reflections looked warped in them. Samir stood near a framed photo of a man holding a cigarette. He asked why I needed that room to see me stand above him. He said he could survive not knowing the terms. He could survive awkward small talk. He said he did not know how to survive being used as proof that I had climbed higher. I told him he was making himself a victim because he did not know how to keep up. That sentence gave him nothing to answer except pain. He did not take the bait. He said the phone stand had been for my desk, not for a table where strangers could judge it. I said I had made it visible. He said I had made it smaller. Back in the room, Talia would not meet my eyes. Orla had changed seats to speak with Miriam. Felix was talking to an investor with his back turned halfway toward me, but not fully. Never fully. He had the gift of leaving without moving. I returned to the table alone because Samir stayed in the hallway for another minute. I told the room he was fine. I told them he hated too much attention. Of course, I used the exact excuse he had never given me. Later, a tagged photo appeared online. I was beside Felix, smiling toward the camera. Samir stood behind us, half-turned, the walnut phone stand in his hand. The picture made him look like staff carrying an object from one place to another. I reposted it. I wrote that some people bring polish, and some people bring texture. My hand shook when I typed texture. I deleted it once, then typed it again. That was the crack in me showing. A small one. I covered it with caption work. On the ride home, Samir held the phone stand on his lap. He did not put it in the back seat. He did not put it in the glove box. His fingers rested on the smooth walnut like he was keeping it from falling. He asked nothing. That silence was not empty. It was full of items being stored. At a red light, I said the dinner had been important. He said he knew. I said then he should not have made it heavy. He looked out the window and said I had already made it heavy. He had only stopped pretending it was light. When we got home, he took the phone stand to his small work corner near the balcony. He placed it on the bench and turned on the lamp. The warm light made the walnut glow. I stood in the doorway with my shoes still on. He picked up a sanding cloth and examined the small scratch the display table had left on one side. His thumb moved over it once. 1 room, 2 witnesses leaving early. No way to put the object back where it started. Layla's dining room smelled like cardamom tea and lemon cleaner, and the chairs were too straight-backed for a conversation that wanted to bend. Samir's sister had invited us for Sunday afternoon. She did not call it a confrontation. People like Layla did not need labels when the table was already set for damage. I called it family theatre. Of course I did. 3 blue cups, 2 untouched biscuits, 1 sister who did not hug me at the door. Layla Nadim was 44, a school administrator with a face that could stay warm while closing every exit. She had never quite forgiven me for a brunch years before, when I joked that Samir's family was too handmade for my office crowd. I had called it charm then. She had called it remembering. Samir sat beside the window. His hands were folded. The walnut phone stand was not with him, but I kept seeing it anyway. Layla poured tea and asked why Samir had to become a joke before I could feel impressive. Calm. Direct. No raised chin. No performance. I told her she did not understand the rooms I worked in. I said ambition looked rude to people who had never needed to fight for entry. She said Samir had spent years building things so I could stand in those rooms more comfortably. I said that was exactly the problem. He was always building around me, never with me. The sentence had truth in it. Enough truth to stand up without help. Samir did love through tasks, shelves, rides, coffee, cables. He made life smoother and expected smoothness to feel like desire. Sometimes it did not. Sometimes it felt like being maintained. Samir looked at me then. He said he had told me once, after a gallery client called him just a maker, that the word stayed with him for weeks. He said I was the only person he had told because he thought I would keep it safe. Naming the pattern would come later. This was vulnerability and it sat there plain. I heard accusation. I heard the past being used to trap me. I said I had not called him just a maker. I had said craftsman. I said there was a difference. Layla put down her cup. The sound was small, but it ended that part of the room. She said I always picked the cleaner word after the dirty one had done its work. That line landed too close to something Miriam would say. I looked at Samir for rescue, and he did not give it. Not because he wanted me punished, because he had stopped translating my sharpness for people who could hear it themselves. On the way home, Talia answered my message after almost an hour. I had written that Layla was holding a family court over one dinner photo. Talia replied only that Sunday conversations were hard and that maybe I should let things cool. No edge, no joke, no fuel. I stared at the screen in the car and told myself she was tired. At home, the apartment had the dry smell of heat coming through vents. Samir went straight to his work corner. I followed because silence made me feel like furniture. He switched on the small lamp. The walnut phone stand sat on the bench with the scratch facing up. He began sanding it. Not angrily. Not theatrically. He folded the fine paper around 2 fingers and moved it over the mark in slow, even strokes. The sound was soft. Almost nothing. Scratch, pause, scratch. His shoulders were bent slightly forward. His face was turned down. He had not changed clothes from Layla's house, so his white shirt cuff kept brushing the edge of the bench. That was the trigger. The door opened in me without asking. I saw the dinner table again. Not the version where I was witty and hard to embarrass. The plain version. My husband watching strangers judge a thing he had made for me. My mouth taking the private place where he had put his fear and carrying it under club lights. His hand closing around the object because I had given it no shelter. The sanding continued. 1 scratch, 2 fingers. No speech. For a few seconds he was not small. He was not limiting me. He was a man trying to repair a gift after I had used it badly. He was careful because he cared, not because he lacked heat. The room had no audience, so there was nowhere for me to perform myself out of that fact. My phone was in my hand. I lifted it. The camera found the wood under the lamp, the curve of his wrist, the golden dust near the edge. I framed it so his face was out, the object was in, and the work looked tasteful. I took the photo. That was how I closed the door. I posted it with a caption about domestic texture and useful beauty. Useful. Beauty. 2 words that sounded harmless because I placed them beside good lighting. Samir heard the notification from my phone. He looked up. He did not ask what I had posted. He looked at the phone, then at the stand, then back at the scratch he had nearly removed. Later that night, he moved his tools from the apartment to his workshop. Not all of them. Just enough. The brass ruler, the good chisels, the oilcloths, the sketchbooks from the shelf near our desk. I asked if he was being dramatic. He said he was making space. What he meant was that he was taking back the part of himself I kept turning into material. What I heard was punishment. By Monday, Miriam had left the private event chat. No announcement. Her name simply disappeared from the member list. Hana stopped sending me drafts for career advice and began sending them to Orla. Talia answered messages with small grey reactions. Felix still sent me short notes, but they came later, cooler, without the warm extra line at the end. I called that scheduling. Of course I did. That evening, Samir stood by the hall table with the phone stand in one hand. He did not give it to me. He placed it in a cloth bag and tied the string. I asked what he was doing with it. He said he was taking it to the workshop. I told him the apartment was his home too. He said some things did not belong here right now. That was the silent decision marker, though I named it mood. I told myself men made objects dramatic when they ran out of words. Before bed, he slept on the sofa. He folded the blanket square. His shoes sat beside the coffee table, lined up as if he planned to leave without waking the floor. Inside the walls, something had already split. The hotel lobby for the content shoot had a living wall, brass lamps, and a long marble desk that reflected every face as if checking for weakness. The air smelled like fig candles and new carpet. Glasshouse Labs had partnered with the hotel for a small campaign about professional identity, which meant cameras, soft chairs, and people telling lies about authenticity. I called it Reclaiming the Story. Of course I did. 2 makeup checks, 1 caption draft, no friend answering fast enough. Felix stood near the reception desk in a dark jacket, speaking to the photographer. He had agreed to appear in a few background shots, not central ones. That was how he moved now. Close enough to look chosen if the result was good. Far enough to vanish if it turned costly. I had drafted the carousel caption in the taxi. Sometimes your glow-up starts when you stop decorating your life with people who make you look smaller. I knew who people would think I meant. That was the point. The first image was me in the hotel lobby, looking toward the glass doors. The second was a crop from the Marlo Club dinner, where Felix and I looked polished, and Samir stood behind us holding the walnut phone stand. The third was the domestic texture photo from our apartment. The fourth was a close shot of my hand on a conference badge. Nothing named Samir. Everything pointed at him. Talia had always been the first person I sent sharp things to. I sent her the caption and waited. Read. No reply. One small word on a screen. It weighed more than Layla's whole dining room. Felix came over and asked if I was sure the post was wise. He said it softly, with a smile for anyone watching. He said people were reading the dinner photo in many ways, and he would rather not be part of a marriage narrative. A marriage narrative. That was what he called the heat he had helped make. I told him he liked the story when it made me look available to better rooms. He said he liked clean boundaries. I almost laughed. Clean boundaries from a man who had spent weeks standing close enough to make my husband look replaceable. Miriam arrived before the photographer started the second round. She was not supposed to be there. Her face had no anger in it, which made it worse. She said Samir was downstairs. I said he was not on the call sheet. Miriam said neither was that caption. Samir came through the revolving doors carrying no bag, no phone in his hand, no walnut stand. He looked like he had walked through cold air and decided not to bring any of it inside. His coat was buttoned. His face was tired. The lobby lowered its volume without going quiet. The receptionist looked from him to me, then back to her screen. Felix stepped half a pace away. Not enough for anyone to call it distance, enough for me to feel it. Samir asked if we could speak near the glass booth. I said we could speak there. I meant in the open. I wanted witnesses. I still believed witnesses made me stronger. He looked at the phone in my hand. The caption was still open. He said he was asking me one last time not to turn private pain into public content. Final and clean. No second sentence chasing the first. I told him he had no right to decide what parts of my life I spoke about. He said I had every right to speak about myself. He said I did not have the right to make a false version of him useful for my image. The word useful hit the floor between us. That was when I said the one correct thing. I told him he had made a whole life out of being useful to me, then acted shocked when I stopped feeling desired. He did not refute it. His mouth closed. His eyes moved once toward the lobby chairs, then back to me. For a few seconds, I had the clean center of the thing. His love had arrived through repairs and rides and quiet work. He had often failed to say the bright thing before I had to ask for it. He had let me feel alone beside a man who was always doing something for me. He said I was right about that. The lobby did not help me then. No camera flash. No gasp. No one rushing to my side. Just Samir saying I was right and leaving me with what I chose to do after being right. He said his failure did not turn his work, his name, or his private fear into props for me to sell myself. I said props was a dramatic word. He said then I should take down the dramatic post before it existed. My thumb hovered over the screen. The caption looked less clever with him standing there. It looked like a trap I had built and then decorated. Felix said my name quietly, not as support, as warning. He had seen the exposure line and was already stepping behind it. Miriam said nothing. Her silence did not feel like judgment. It felt like a door she had already closed. I posted. The little progress circle spun. Then the images appeared on my profile. Samir looked at the screen only long enough to see it live. He did not ask me to delete it again. He did not raise his voice. He did not tell me I would regret it. He did not give me a scene I could call abuse later. He said he would handle it properly. No legal words, no threats, no names of people who might help him. Just that. Then he left the lobby. His silence after that was worse than any speech because it had no open edge. There was nothing to argue with, no crack to push a finger into. He had placed the end down and walked away from it. I told the photographer we needed 5 minutes. My voice came out normal. Too normal. That was another thing I used to admire about myself. Felix checked his phone and said he had another meeting. He apologized to the photographer, not to me. He told me he hoped the post landed in the way I intended. The phrase landed in the way I intended made my skin tighten. He was already making the result mine alone. I called Talia in the restroom. Voicemail. No callback. That was her exit. Small on the screen, large in the mirror. The restroom had black sinks and lights around the glass. I stood there and refreshed the post. Reactions came fast. Shocked faces. Laughing faces. Private messages from people who loved a public wound as long as it was not theirs. Then the other messages started. Miriam had commented nothing. Orla had not liked it. Hannah had watched the story and left no reaction. Layla's name appeared in the viewers, then disappeared when I checked again. Felix's comment, the first one he had posted under the carousel, was gone by evening. He had written strong image earlier. 2 harmless words. By 6, even those were too much for him to leave beside me. At home, Samir was not there. The workshop lights were on across the courtyard. I could see them from our balcony, a yellow square in the cold dark. His side of the closet had 3 empty hangers. His good coat was gone. The cloth bag with the walnut phone stand was gone too. On the hall table where his keys usually sat, there was only the apartment spare he had removed from his ring. He had placed it beside a small stack of mail, straightened at the edges. I called it theatre. Of course I did. Then I picked up the key and found my hand had no place to put it. The legal reveal arrived 2 days later in the Glasshouse Labs office lobby, where the floor always smelled faintly of burnt espresso from the cafe next door. I had just passed the reception desk when the courier asked for Annika Rowe. Miriam was near the elevators with a tablet in her hand. Layla stood beside Samir by the glass wall. Samir did not look like a man arriving to fight. He looked like a man finishing an errand. The envelope was thick, cream-coloured, and stiff at the corners. I signed for it with the courier's black pen. My name came out too large on the little screen. Then I stood there holding the envelope while the revolving doors moved behind me again and again. Across the top of the first page was the document name, Formal Defamation and Privacy Complaint, with immediate takedown demand. It listed the Marlo Club photo, the domestic texture post, the hotel lobby carousel, the caption about people who made me look smaller, and the implied claim that Samir had harmed my professional image. It named the requested next step clearly. Remove the posts within 48 hours, preserve all related messages and drafts, and respond through the address listed by Monday at noon. The receptionist placed a visitor badge back into its drawer and said, not unkindly, that the small meeting room was free if I needed privacy. Privacy. After all that. Miriam looked at the envelope, then at me, and said the posts were still live. Just a fact. No softness. No blade. Samir spoke once. He said I made it public first. Then he walked out before Layla, before Miriam, before anyone could turn him into part of my scene again. Felix deleted the shared hotel photos by lunch and sent one message saying he had never approved being included in my personal content. The apartment became temporary. After that, because Samir stayed above the workshop and I stayed with 2 suitcases and a rental desk that wobbled when I typed. My savings moved into response fees, content removal help, and a deposit for a smaller place near the tram line. Miriam stopped meeting me for coffee. Orla left the founder dinner thread. And Talia's name stayed grey under my last 3 messages. Felix changed his profile image, removed the hotel tag, and answered only through careful one-line emails. At work, people still invited me to meetings, but nobody asked me to write language about trust. I had believed image control was protection. I had believed a better room could make a better version of me, and that Samir's quiet hands were proof I had been placed too low. What destroyed me was not that he was small, it was that I needed him to look small so I could look tall. The walnut phone stand was not on my new desk. The empty space held my phone flat against the wood, face down, where no one could see me.